This is Loewe 7 Cobalt. Let's talk about why I bought it, why I like it, if it's a compliment getting kind of scent, if the performance is any good, and how I'm going to rate it from 1 to 10. So let's start with why I bought Loewe 7 Cobalt. This has been one of my most recommended and most hyped by you in my comments over the last few years. So all it took was a few years of nagging from you in order for me to finally buy my full bottle of my first Loewe fragrance. So let's go through what it smells like, and I'm gonna list all the notes below. You really feel the sage coming through right away with its brightness and freshness, and you also get a bit of spicy freshness on top of that. So the first time I put my nose to Loewe 7 Cobalt, all it took was like 3 seconds for me to understand why this is such a light fragrance. The aromatic and spicy freshness that you get right in the opening feels familiar, and familiar in a good way. And my first thought right away was that this could easily have been one of those super versatile scents from like the Wiser Y line, perhaps something from that line mixed with a bit of Bleu de Chanel's DNA. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this definitely right away feels familiar, but I'm gonna say there's a slight hint of something unique to Loewe 7 Cobalt. And I do think that if you're someone who absolutely loves fragrances that have a bit of aromatic freshness and brightness to them, then you most likely enjoy the opening. I think the heart of it is where Loewe 7 Cobalt starts to go in a slightly more unique direction while still having a bit of familiarity to it, and the more unique direction that it takes is pretty much thanks to a mix of fruitiness, something slightly smoky and softly woody. The heart of it is where that black currant is pushing through for sure, and you also start to get a somewhat prominent dose of smokiness. However, I do feel that the smoky side of Loewe 7 is of the more mass appealing kind. I'm very picky when it comes to incense in fragrances. This, however, is incense, at least to my nose, done right. And this is when we start to get this mix of freshness with a bit of warmth. And I do feel it's primarily the incense that separates it from fragrances like Y Eau de Parfum and Y Eau de Parfum Intense. But these two are some of the fragrances I initially thought about when I first put my nose on this. The incense here briefly made me think of Versace Dylan Bleu, and the incense that one has, however, this and that fragrance are actually quite different. And the more Loewe 7 Cobalt moves into the dry down, the more I feel the whole thing shifts away from being primarily aromatic into being more woody, fruity and smoky, and the whole thing being warmer instead of fresher. Another very noticeable difference in the dry down is that the whole thing has turned quite ambery and a bit green. So its fresh side has almost shifted from being something quite aromatic fresh into something that is a bit softly green, and you have this really nice ambery warmth and shine around you. So what you're basically getting with Loewe 7 Cobalt is a mix of aromatic and spicy freshness. You get a prominent but smooth dose of woodiness. You definitely have quite a prominent dose of fruitiness from blackcurrant. However, this is fruity but not that sweet, and you also get a really nice dose of incense, which to my nose adds this really smooth kind of smokiness to the whole thing. And all that rests on top of what I think is a very smooth dose of woodiness, and the whole thing is a bit ambery warm. So what other fragrances is Loewe 7 Cobalt similar to? This feels very familiar, and it almost feels like something from Bleu de Chanel mixed with something from the Wiser Y line, like maybe Y Eau de Parfum and a mix of Y Eau de Parfum and Y Eau de Parfum Intense. And that's mostly because of its aromatic side and the fruitiness that it has. However, the incense here really pulls it in a different direction. So while it definitely smells familiar, there's a bit of uniqueness to it for sure. But I do feel that if you're someone who absolutely loves those kind of scents that you can usually find in like the Y line or the Bleu de Chanel line, then you most likely enjoy this. So let's talk about compliments and mass appeal. This is basically a mix of a very likable and mass appealing dose of aromatic and spicy freshness. The fruity side of it is extremely likable, and even the incense here is done in a more mass appealing kind of way. This is a very likable kind of scent. To my nose, this goes into the territory, the kind of mass appeal that I usually get from the Y line. And I got a compliment right away when I wore it for the first time. So let's talk about the vibe here. This to me is definitely quite classy and elegant, but this is class and elegance, at least to my nose, done with a bit of sexiness. And I guess I basically feel that this is this kind of scent profile done in a very classy way. When it comes to performance, I'm getting solid longevity from this, and I'm gonna rate the longevity somewhere between 8 and 8.5. Projection, at least initially, is easily around 7.5 and 8. And Loewe 7 Cobalt is easily noticeable, at least like the first couple of hours. The scent cloud definitely does get a bit smaller after like 2 or 3 hours. But I'm gonna say even after that, the whole thing is definitely quite easily noticeable. With that said, I do not feel Loewe 7 Cobalt is a beast mode kind of scent. So let's talk about some of the alternatives. And the first line and the first scent I thought of when I put my nose to this was definitely White Eau de Parfum. And I do feel this is basically doing White Eau de Parfum but with a twist. Both have a gorgeous dose of aromatic freshness and brightness from sage, and both are a bit spicy fresh. But I do feel White Eau de Parfum is a bit more fresh with an additional kind of freshness to it. Both of these are woody, fruity and amber. However, their fruity sides are definitely different. And like I mentioned before, a key difference is definitely the incense in Cobalt. I did a complete comparison and ranked of the entire Y line. I'm gonna link to that one up here and in the description below. White Eau de Parfum is definitely a fantastic alternative. They are not the same though, and I definitely feel Loewe 7 Cobalt goes in a more classy and elegant direction. For a more nuanced and intense dose of aromatic freshness, you have White Eau de Parfum Intense. You get a combo of sage and lavender mixed with a bit of citrus on an incredibly smoothly woody base. White Eau de Parfum Intense is basically the more smooth, more classy and elegant version of White Eau de Parfum, and when it comes to the vibe, I do feel that White Eau de Parfum matches Cobalt in a better way. And pretty much the entire Bleu de Chanel line is an alternative to this. I could probably go on and on because this definitely feels quite familiar, but familiar done with a twist. So let's talk a bit about the usage, so like seasons and occasions. This to my nose falls into the same kind of scent like White Eau de Parfum Intense and scents like that. So to my nose, Loewe 7 Cobalt is definitely the kind of scent you can wear throughout the year on any occasion. And I do feel it's a great scent for both formal and casual occasions. It works just as well for like work or school as it does for going out or going on a date. When it comes to price, I paid about 75 bucks on a discounter for 50 ml of this. But I did see in my comments that some of you managed to find bigger bottles than that for the same price. So I'm really not sure if I overpaid for this. However, I do feel that for what you get, the amount of juice and how well made it is, it's not too expensive. So what are my final thoughts on Loewe 7 Cobalt and how am I going to rate it from 1 to 10? When I spray this thing on, I definitely feel like I've smelled something like it before. So I do feel Loewe 7 Cobalt does something extremely familiar, but does it in an extremely well-made kind of way. It basically takes the kind of scent profile I absolutely love, something that is quite intensely aromatic fresh, mixed with a bit of fruitiness and woodiness, but the twist here is really the incense, which to me is done in an extremely smooth and very likable way. Loewe 7 Cobalt is the kind of scent I truly enjoy wearing, and the kind of scent I know that I can spray on and smell good throughout the year on any occasion. And even though I have a ton of fragrances that basically does the same thing, the twist of it, the incense, makes it different enough so that I don't feel this is redundant in my collection. And I want to say a big thanks to all of you who in my comments for a few years now recommended me to buy this. After finally putting my nose to this thing, I do understand the hype, and I'm gonna give Loewe 7 Cobalt a 9 out of 10. Do you agree with my ranking or not? And how would you rate this thing from 1 to 10? Let me know in the comments. Please drop a like and subscribe for more, and make sure to check out my other videos over there.